Hey, so in today's video, I just wanted to share with you my process of how I do shadow work. I will give you the heads up though that I've only been learning and kind of researching shadow work for the past little while, so I'm not really, that in depth of a student or anything like that. I just saw that there were a lot of similarities to what I was already doing, and I just wanted to kind of share the similarities and basically the process of what I do for my emotional work, which is basically the same thing as shadow work. And so one of the ways that I do shadow work is manually. So by this process, I mean that it's kind of in a controlled environment, a controlled setting. And so I take the time to contemplate, to reflect, and to journal. I basically do a brain dump and just write out everything that I'm thinking of, anything without holding back. And this is where I just reflect upon like a situation or scenario that I kind of want to, resolve or kind of bring up for myself. And so a lot of times this is where I'm kind of, feeling like I might need to process something. So I will ask myself like reflective questions. What was I feeling? What did this scenario tell me? And this is just to help bring up like my emotions and my feelings so that I can kind of process it and find out what the shadow kind of like is behind that. And a lot of times, this can be pretty efficient and effective, but there is only so far that you can go with it. It can only go so deep, I guess you could say. And so I find that doing this can only get you, to a certain level where you can reflect on things, and it kind of deals with more of the surface level shadow. But the main process is to basically just get my feelings and emotions out there and to process it. So when I say process it, I mean to feel it fully, to feel the emotions fully, to feel the feelings fully. But like I said, it brings awareness to the emotions and feelings behind a scenario, and it can bring up, what it's telling you that your shadow is, but it doesn't always allow you to process the emotion fully, because I feel like for me personally, when I've done this work manually, that I only am able to process a fraction of what the feelings and emotions are. A lot of times it's when you're in the heat of the battle that I find that I get the most of my work, the most of my shadow work done. And that takes a lot of practice. It took me a really long time to kind of get to that point. And so that brings me to the next way of doing shadow work for me is basically being in the battle of it. This is basically the arena of life, right? Where as things come up, as scenarios come up, I basically process and deal with those emotions as best as I can in the moment. And so this is where it's really important to build your awareness muscle. You can do that through meditating, through practicing mindfulness throughout the day, just incorporating it and just reminding yourself to be mindful, to be present and in the moment. And so doing those practices for me has really helped me build my awareness muscle. And by having a stronger awareness muscle, I am able to kind of deal with the projections and reactions and triggers that happen throughout the day and be able to process it from like at that point on, like in that moment. Oftentimes too, there will be situations where you can't process it right away, but you can only do your best, right? So some of the signs that your shadow has come up, as I mentioned before, it could be through projections, through triggers, through your reaction. If it's like a disproportionate reaction to the scenario, that that's your shadow like coming up to kind of be dealt with. And also too, through self-sabotage. I know that in the past, I had like so many goals that I wanted to accomplish in life, but there were so many times where I would self-sabotage. And so I really had to dive deep into, my own like shadow and figure out like what it was that was stopping me from accomplishing things and basically sabotaging myself from my goals. So at this point, when you have a sign that your shadow is at play, you basically want to start investigating inside of you. Your attention for that moment has been outward, but now you want to bring that attention inward and try to focus on, where the emotion is, what is it saying, how does it feel, and just try to bring everything, all your attention back to inside of you. You want to basically become aware of the feelings and the emotions that are going on. And then with that, you basically want to kind of start reflecting upon, like, what is it that it's telling me about my shadow? What is it about this person who may have triggered me to react in this kind of way? Like, what is it saying about me? You basically want to start kind of asking yourself questions that just make you kind of reflect inward and to kind of go inward and get a sense of what is going on and become so present and aware of all the emotions and feelings that are going on that you can have more of a control over it rather than your shadow having control over you. So doing the shadow work is basically unraveling what the unconscious program is within us. I feel that when you're doing this work, if you don't have an answer right away as to what the shadow is, what the shadow is telling you, is it a need met that I have within me that I'm not enforcing in my own life? Is it reflecting back to me? Like, is this projection reflecting back to me that it's something that I'm trying to, hide or repress within myself? It's not always apples to apples, the shadow that's being projected and what's going on inside of you. Like I said, it could be an unmet need, that is around boundaries or something that you may have that someone else is so freely, trampling all over your boundaries that's what's creating the reaction in you. But sometimes as we do shadow work, you may not always get an answer as to what it's telling you that your shadow is. And that's okay, because I think that you can still do shadow work and still have it be effective without knowing the reasons why all the time, especially not right away. I find that for me, there are so many times that I, would have to reflect on it, and then it would come to me later. And so I would have the realization later of what my shadow was, and then I can kind of incorporate that into the future. But basically, in the moment, you may not always know, and that's okay, but you can still process and do the rest of the shadow work and still have it be effective. So this is a really important part, I believe, to shadow work. I think that, being aware of our feelings and emotions and kind of seeing like how we are triggered or having an disproportionate like response to something, those are all signals, and that's just scratching the surface of shadow work. I feel like this part here is the most important part because this is where we actually process it. So when I say process your shadow, I basically just mean that you feel the emotions fully, you be present with it and let it kind of go through you. And oftentimes it's really uncomfortable, but it definitely takes practice, and it's something that you don't want to necessarily jump into like fully right away, even though I said to, feel it fully. But in the context of doing shadow work, I definitely think that you should ease into it and take it slow rather than jump fully right in, unless you have been doing the work already or familiar with your own emotions and are aware of it and have been processing, your own emotions for a while. So I think that, this is the most important work because we've been basically repressing our shadow for so long, and along with repressing our shadow, like it's just this big ball of emotions that we haven't processed or dealt with. So it can be overwhelming at times, but the more you practice it, the easier it can be, and the more skilled you'll be at processing it and letting it go, essentially. But basically this is the part where you need to feel the feelings. A lot of times it'll be uncomfortable, but it's just about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. I know that's really cliche, but that's really true, because we've spent our whole life repressing this aspect of ourselves, and now, it's really uncomfortable because we haven't had to deal with it. And so now it's about feeling the feelings, letting the emotions go through us, and then continuing to do that practice. Like, I've been doing this emotional work for so long now, and I still continue to do it. There's still so much to work with because, there's a lot of things that have happened in my life. And so I don't think it'll ever, end or anything like that, but it's just a continuous practice that does get easier, that you do get more skillful at. So I do believe that, as you do this work, as you ease into it and get more practice, it'll be such like a wonderful tool to be able to process your emotions and to kind of, do that kind of shadow work. But I do want to point out as well that it's really important that if it's possible to process the emotions and the feelings that are kind of coming up for you, but only if it's safe. If it's not safe, the the next best thing to do is basically to consciously suppress it, to be deliberate about it, to kind of just do your best to let out a little, let out as much as you can, but whatever you can't fully process, you can always just kind of come back to later. You might have to manually, journal or whatever, or contemplate and reflect on it later on when you have a moment to be deliberate about it. And then you may be able to process the rest of the emotions then. But I think it's really important to kind of, understand and discern for yourself when it is safe and not safe to process the emotions, because sometimes you might need to express anger, and expressing it during a work meeting isn't always a good thing. And so when it's good to kind of do it on your own terms, you might have to use that tactic of consciously suppressing it and then processing it another time. But the more practice that you have with it, I do believe that you are much more skilled in the moment to be able to handle it and to process those emotions. So I know when we talk about the shadow, people always think that we only repress the negative emotions, the negative attributes or whatever, but that's not true. Carl Jung talks about, the golden shadow, which is also the positive attributes that we've had to repress because it was punished within, our social or family dynamics. And so it doesn't always mean that we have to process negative emotions, but we also have to see to how we project the things that we admire in people, that we kind of put on a pedestal and wish that we had or had a desire for it. So that's also a sign too of the things that we repress within ourselves that are actually positive attributes. So I think it's really, for me personally, I think it's really easy to do shadow work now, after all the practice and stuff, because it's basically about learning self-forgiveness, right? To process all those emotions and all that. But when it comes to the golden shadow, that's where I have a lot of challenges with still, because it's about having self-belief, and that's something that I have struggled with all my life. And so emotions are a really useful tool once we get a good hold of them. I think that growing up, we just have been emotionally unintelligent as a society, and so we didn't know how to process them properly. We didn't know how to kind of deal with all our repressed attributes and emotions. And so now that we are doing the work and, trying to be more conscious of what was unconscious, I think that it's emotions and things like that, or shadow, can be a very useful tool to inform us of things. They are there to tell us, what's going on and to help us navigate life. And so I guess that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.